Okay, so welcome to the Department of Environmental Quality information session on the extended private well sampling being conducted in Bladen, Cumberland, Sampson, Robeson, Harnett, and Hoke counties. We are anticipating an in-person information session as a follow-up. I am Heather Standish, the Hazardous Waste Section Chief with the Department of Environmental Quality Division of Waste Management. We appreciate everyone's time and attention this evening. During this session, all participants will be muted. If you would like to ask a question, please submit your questions in the chat box at any time. Chat submissions will only be seen by the panelist. We will attempt to address each question during the question and answer session following the presentations. To send a chat message, open the chat panel, enter your message, and press enter. Technical support will also be addressed through the chat. This session will be recorded and the recording will be made available after this session through our website. Next slide, please. The purpose of this information session is to inform the community about the expanded well sampling eligibility, provide background information on why the well sampling is occurring, provide an explanation on why the areas included in this effort has expanded, provide information on health impacts related to PFAS, and address community concerns. Chemours has sent out letters to residents in the subject area. These letters were sent out with the intent to identify properties where the primary source of drinking water is well water and to offer to sample those wells. Residents in the expanded area interested in having their wells sampled should call Chemours at 910-678-1101. The agenda this evening includes 3 presentations totaling around 35 minutes. This will be followed by a 40-minute question and answer session. Now I'll introduce the presenters. The first presentation will be given by Michael Scott, the Director of the Department of Environmental Quality's Division of Waste Management. He will be providing an overview of how we got here. The second presentation will be given by Jared Wilson, the Environmental Program Analyst with the Office of the Secretary. He will be providing an explanation of the extended sampling area. The third presentation will be given by Kennedy Holt, environmental toxicologist with the Division of Public Health within the Department of Health and Human Services. He will be presenting on health impacts related to PFAS. Additional staff are present on the call providing support. This includes Catherine Lucas, Public Information Officer with the Department of Environmental Quality, Eric Oftahar, Hydrogeologist with the Division of Waste Management, Rebecca Funderburg, Environmental Program Consultant with the Division of Waste Management, and Jessica Monti, Environmental Program Consultant with the Division of Waste Management. After the presentations, there will be a question and answer session. So please enter any questions you have into the chat. Now we will start with the first presentation, an overview of how we got here, presented by Michael Scott.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate everyone attending this evening and taking some time to join us to learn more about this expanded private well sampling around the Bladen County Chemours plant. This evening, we want to touch on several different areas. We want to talk about PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and specifically one of those PFAS, Gen X, that's often associated with the Chemours plant in Bladen County. We want to talk about the ongoing groundwater sampling, including private wells in the region, and what that sampling can lead to, meaning alternate water options if these PFAS, including Gen X, are found above certain levels in private drinking water wells, and additional information on this important front. Next slide, please. So if you're not as familiar with this subject when it comes to PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, they do include one particular type of PFAS is Gen X, which does come from the Chemours plant. It's actually a trade name for a man-made, virtually unregulated chemical that's used in manufacturing of nonstick coatings and for other purposes. It's what we often refer to as an emerging compounds in the PFAS family. It is emitted by one company, formerly the DuPont plant, now the Chemours plant, just off of Highway 87 at the Bladen County and Cumberland County line. This particular compound has been discharged into the environment, as you can see, including the Cape Fear River, for multiple decades at very small levels, part per trillion levels, it's been hard to detect the presence of this compound in the environment until the last few years. When we talk about PFAS and the greater emerging compound family, there are often no specific limitations in environmental regulations. We actually have some proposed groundwater standards in North Carolina for certain PFAS, including Gen X. As some of you may be aware, the EPA has also proposed maximum contaminant levels and passed those levels into effect for drinking water. But we also don't know exactly how these compounds behave in the environment. And we look forward to hearing more from Kennedy Holt with the Department of Health and Human Services to learn more about these PFAS compounds and how they affect human health and the environment. What we do know is that they can have a negative effect on humans' health, to include things like impacts to the function of the liver, thyroid, pancreas, and even hormone levels. And Kennedy will touch on this more from the Department of Health and Human Services. And as I mentioned, it also presents significant challenges for regulatory agencies addressing these compounds, and that's why it's important for us to cover this topic tonight. And specifically, if a private well is used as your primary drinking water source, we definitely want you to pursue having that well tested, and that testing is free of charge by Chemours. And we'll talk. Next slide, please. So if you're newer to this subject, a lot of this started in early mid 2017. So this work has been ongoing for a while with impacts to the Cape Fear River, with these compounds to include Gen X being discovered. We quickly found that it was also in groundwater, unfortunately. And one of the big questions tonight, if you're in Harnett, Hoke, or some of the outward areas from the Chemours plant, how did this get so far, meaning miles away from the Bladen County, Cumberland County line? And we found in mid-late 2017, there were air emission contributions. These compounds were literally being emitted through the stacks and traveling through the air, being deposited as dry or wet deposition. This led us to a very important legal document, the consent order being signed in 2019. That is a Bladen County Superior Court document between our state agency, DEQ, and the Chemours Company and an environmental group, Cape Fear River Watch, regarding how these compounds will be assessed, remediated, and alternate drinking water provided to impacted communities. One of the big messages tonight, these compounds did spread throughout the atmosphere miles from the plant. And you'll see on this slide in December of 2019, one of the main controls was put in place, meaning the thermal oxidizer to curb those emissions. And where we are now is discussing the ongoing private well testing to ensure communities are not exposed to these compounds in well water, and also additional sampling in the Lower Cape Fear region, which is also ongoing. And that typically refers to the greater Wilmington area, Pender County, Columbus, and Brunswick County areas. Next slide, please. So when we think about this former DuPont, now called Chemours plant, just off of Highway 87, once again, the Bladen, Cumberland County line there along the Cape Fear River, this is a good illustration that shows us how these man-made or PFAS compounds enter the environment and also into groundwater and then unfortunately private well water in several counties, as Heather described. So in this illustration, you see the blue line to the far right towards the bottom. That's the Cape Fear River, the production plant for Chemours on top of the slide there with the two stacks. And you see the aerial emission, blue arrow, how these compounds initially, one way they entered the environment. They also entered the environment through processed wastewater, unfortunately entering the Cape Fear River, as you see to the blue area on the left through the old outflow. There was also impacted groundwater, the blue arrow in the middle. You may be able to see the term seeps. That's where groundwater actually surfaces from the plant and enters the Cape Fear River. So up to 2017, these compounds, including Gen X, had multiple pathways to enter the environment. Next slide, please. So we started in 2017, as the previous slide noted, looking at this aerial image of the Fayetteville Works facility. It is called Fayetteville Works because it not only includes Chemours, but also some other entities, including DuPont and Carrari, meaning other companies that operate at this Fayetteville Works site, once again on the Bladen-Cumberland line. In 2017, we found that groundwater was impacted at the site, and there was a need, as these red dots show in the image, showing levels of PFAS, specifically Gen X in groundwater, led us to believe that off-site or around the area of this plant would need to be sampled to ensure people did not have these compounds in their well water. Our State Department of Health and Human Services quickly established a provisional health goal for the compound Gen X in drinking water, and EPA more recently updated the National Health Advisory to 10 ppt in 2022 for Gen X, and then more recently last year established the maximum contaminant level of 10 ppt for Gen X in drinking water. And this slide basically gives us the illustration of the impacts at the plant and the need to sample private wells in surrounding communities. In the 2021 timeframe, we also issued a letter to Chemours as DEQ stating that they were also responsible, unfortunately, for impacting private wells in the lower Cape Fear region. This was caused by the Cape Fear River being impacted by these PFAS, flowing towards the Atlantic Ocean, and other communities utilizing that river as a drinking water source, leading to additional contamination in that region. Next slide, please. So one important take-home message tonight, if you're newer to the conversation about private well sampling, PFAS, and Chemours, is to definitely reference the Bladen County Superior Court document, or what we call the consent order. This is the legal document that drives the private well sampling, potentially in your community, and also the controls, the reductions in PFAS that were required by the Chemours company. And as you see here, Chemours has been required to reduce their air emissions to achieve maximum reductions of all remaining PFAS to the Cape Fear River, to notify downstream public utilities if there are discharges of these compounds, and what we're here talking about this evening primarily, the third bullet, sample private drinking water wells, and if they are found to be impacted, provide alternate solutions. And there are additional penalties if these objectives are failed to be met. Next slide, please. So in addition to the consent order, another take-home message, there is an additional part to that document we call the addendum that was established in 2020. And I'll quickly walk through the aspects of it. But that additional component of the legal document consent order pushed to meet further emission reduction milestones at the Chemours plant, determine what PFAS are in wastewater and stormwater, and determine what amounts are also in river sediment and downstream raw water intakes, and to make sure specific actions were taken to reduce more than 90% of PFAS entering the Cape Fear River through the groundwater source and residual contamination. So we'll look at a few slides to quickly show you how this was addressed. Next slide, please. So when we go back to that original illustration, how did these PFAS get in my private well potentially if I live in Lower Harnett, Hoke, Bladen, Robeson, Sampson, or Cumberland counties? How did they get here? Well, one way was through that aerial deposition that the top of this slide shows, but we did get through our Division of Air Quality, that thermal oxidizer as a requirement to cut off those aerial emissions. So you see the blue arrow now has an X. We have required Chemours to take their processed water and ship it off-site. The blue arrow to the left of the plant now has an X on it. And those other discharges to the Cape Fear River, that large blue line at the bottom of the slide, also have X's on them, as Chemours has been required to capture those flows and remove PFAS from them. So we're wanting people to get their private wells sampled, but also share the information that we've been actively working to stop these sources of PFAS from the plant entering the environment. Next slide, please. So the Division of Air Quality has a critical role in these emission reductions that were required of the facility. And the emissions have significantly lowered, as this slide illustrates. If you see the manufacturing facility example on the right side of the picture, definitely an example of the Chemours plant where previously these PFAS came out in air emissions, they traveled through the wind, and then to the left of the picture there, they came down in surface deposition, either as wet deposition with rainfall or potentially came down actually as a dry source of PFAS. And then they leached into the soil, most likely through precipitation or rain events, then impacting the underlying groundwater. And in areas, that groundwater naturally flows to major sources like the Cape Fear River, which can also lead to these PFAS entering the river. But it's a great illustration showing how the air emissions from the Chemours plant, may have led to the impacts to private drinking water wells in the region. And we have established that connection. There have been control technology improvements. We've talked about the thermal oxidizer. It's also coupled with a scrubber control system that was installed in 2019 to provide that 99% facility-wide Gen X emissions reduction. Next slide, please. And this slide has a lot of data to provide this evening, but it does illustrate some of the sampling sites that our department and specifically Division of Air Quality have been active in sampling and monitoring these air emissions over time. You see the different colors based on the different sampling sites at the bottom of the screen. On the left axis is the total Gen X deposition over time, which starts from 2018 through middle of 2024. The main take-home message here is you see these elevated line graphs at multiple sites on the far left where this atmospheric deposition was occurring early on. You then see in 2019 when that thermal oxidizer came online a little bit to the right of the middle of this graph, and the significant reduction across these monitoring sites of these PFAS in aerial deposition. So definitely working collectively as a department across our programs to stop these PFAS emissions to the environment. Next slide, please. And I'll move through these fairly quickly, but we did want to show illustrations of the different controls at the plant. This is the Cape Fear River on the right, an aerial image of the Fayetteville Works facility. Once again, not only Chemours operates there, but DuPont and Carrari. There are requirements under that legal document, the consent order, to provide remediation at what we call the old outfall 002, where stormwater, groundwater leave the site, other flows from the production facility that had PFAS in them and needed to be treated. And the picture shows some of the canisters that are included in the treatment process so that any flows that reach the river are basically PFAS free. Next slide, please. Additional controls have been put on when it comes to groundwater. Once again, an aerial image of the plant, the Cape Fear River on the right. These seeps A through D are areas where groundwater literally surfaces like a stream and flows to the river. And this groundwater, unfortunately, is significantly impacted by these man-made compounds, making its way to the river. And through the consent order addendum, the 4 treatment systems were installed late 2020 through early 2021, actually using an activated carbon system to remove these man-made PFAS from those particular flows. Next slide, please. And one of the final remedies that has been implemented more recently has been the barrier wall. This is actually an underground wall, approximately 80 foot deep, over 5,000 feet long, as you see there, upwards of 6,000 feet actually, along the perimeter of the Chemours plant, the Greater Fayetteville Works facility, between it and the Cape Fear River. This wall was installed to cut off groundwater, once again, that is heavily impacted by PFAS from being allowed to flow straight to the Cape Fear River and impact that vital resource. Next slide, please. That barrier wall is coupled with a groundwater extraction system, so we don't just want an underground wall that impedes the groundwater. We want to make sure it doesn't reach the river, but also extract it through 70 extraction wells along that wall alignment. Once again, with the plant area being on the left in this aerial image, the river on the right, and these extraction wells pumping out that PFAS impacted groundwater and treating it so that it doesn't reach the river with that contaminant load. Next slide, please. So as we focus tonight not only on stopping the source there at the Chemours facility, we really want to focus on the sampling and expanded sampling that we're going to talk about of private wells. A lot of work has been done since the establishment of the original consent order to sample private wells, to look at not only an initial well, but wells within a quarter mile that have PFAS levels above 10 part per trillion. That's an important threshold that's listed in the consent order. To annually retest a subset of wells that were previously sampled, and to provide alternate solutions quickly, like bottled water or vouchers, which we'll talk more about. That compound Gen X, once again, has that trigger threshold of 10 part per trillion, and it can trigger either an alternate water system that includes whole house filtration, under the sink reverse osmosis filtration, or even possibly a waterline connection if it's available. And we'll show you some pictures of these alternate water solutions. If it's not the Gen X compound, there are others, PFAS, that are associated with the Chemours plant. If those are discovered in well water, any single PFAS or a combination of them at or above 70 parts per trillion, then alternate water can also be triggered. But once again, if it's not Gen X, the solution that's offered under the consent order are what's called under the sink filtration systems, called reverse osmosis. And we'll show you a picture of that. Next slide, please. So when it comes to sampling a private drinking water well, this is actually a picture of DEQ colleagues. Chemours is the main responsible party for private well sampling, also in the new region of Harnett and Hoke counties, and has been sampling already in Bladen, Cumberland, Robeson, and Sampson counties. But this illustration shows that most of these samples can be collected without entering the home most of the time at the wellhead or at the side of the house. The colleagues and even Chemours consultants will follow personal protective equipment requirements, distancing guidelines, just to make sure folks are comfortable with getting their wells sampled. It is a free well sampling. There's no cost associated with this. And the main take-home message tonight, if you didn't receive a letter and you're online with us, please write down the number 910-678-1101 to get your well tested. That's the very important first step. And we're here as DEQ to help folks with questions in the Cape Fear region and also in the lower Cape Fear region where this sampling is also occurring. Once again, it's not Chemours that comes to your house if you want to have your well tested. It's a environmental consultant, environmental professionals who are versed in this area of sampling. They're not Chemours employees, they're an environmental contractor, and we approve the labs where these samples are sent to make sure the data is accurate and that informed decisions can be made from that data. Next slide, please. So you may receive a letter similar to this. It will typically have the Chemours logo on it, offering private well sampling, whether you mail back a response, call the 1101 number, or reach out, like I said, via mail or online. There are several options to request to get your well sampled. Some of the take-home messages in addition this evening, there have been a lot of letters sent out to this region. Over 150,000 unique properties were mailed a well sampling questionnaire, and it includes the counties Heather initially mentioned, from Bladen, Cumberland, Robeson, Sampson, and the new counties to this well sampling, Hoke and Harnett. They are being sent to well owners based on a geographical area where atmospheric deposition from the plant may have occurred, where these compounds may have come down from that atmospheric deposition and impacted groundwater. They do ask for information about your private well if you have one, and if that's your main source of drinking water. If you're connected to municipal water, that's your main source for tap water. You're not eligible for sampling under this particular protocol. And in addition to Gen X, the main compound we discussed this evening, they will also sample for 11 other compounds as listed in that bottom bullet. And any of those compounds can trigger alternate water based on the levels we previously discussed, that 10 part per trillion level or a combination of those compounds at or above 70. Next slide, please. So just a few figures. This work has been going on for quite a while now. Jared will talk more about the expanded area in just a few minutes. We have, unfortunately, over 7,000 properties in this greater Cape Fear region that are eligible for alternate water. So it is a concern and important that people get their well sampled. That's the first step. Over 5,000 of those homes have a single compound or a combination of compounds triggering alternate water. Almost 2,000 properties in this current region have that Gen X compound at 10 part per trillion or higher. And those are the ones that are eligible for whole house filtration, which we'll talk about in the upcoming slides. It is important to note that Chemours covers the cost of sampling. They also cover the cost of these filtration systems, and they cover the cost of maintenance for these filtration systems for up to 20 years. So those are some important aspects as well. And if there are water lines available in your community, in your neighborhood, it may be possible under the consent order to also have Chemours pay for your house to be connected to municipal water, the tap fee, the plumbing fee, and if Gen X is found at 10 part per trillion or higher, the requirement is that Chemours will also cover the water bills up to $75 per month. So I know that's a lot of information. It is listed in the consent order, but once again, very important first step to get your private well sampled. Next slide, please. So these are some pictures of the alternate water systems. The picture in the center shows a sink base and then the black canisters. That's what's called a reverse osmosis system. It's highly effective at removing PFAS. We have sampled these systems as DEQ. We have our own data at the state showing that they are effective in removing these compounds. And that system is triggered when these other, not Gen X, PFAS are found in private well water. The picture on the far right is a whole house activated carbon. Those tall blue canisters have what's actually carbon in them, and it often includes iron and sediment filters, those smaller canisters on the left. Also highly effective in removing these PFAS. That system, the blue canisters, is triggered when Gen X, under the consent order, that legal document, is found at 10 part per trillion or higher. Next slide, please. So if your well is tested, which we highly encourage, it can take 4 to 6 weeks to receive the results. When you receive the results, if Chemours PFAS are found, remember that threshold we talked about, 10 part per trillion for Gen X or other PFAS or a combination of them above 70, Chemours will quickly offer you an immediate alternate water solution. Most likely, it will be what's called a voucher card, a card you can take to the grocery store or anywhere you would buy food to pay for bottled water and the type of water and the size container you would like. They have previously delivered bottled water to front porches or to your garage if these PFAS are unfortunately found, but based on people's preferences and the type of water, the size of container, they have moved to this voucher system. The money on the voucher card is reloaded basically every 90 days. If you have specific needs in your household or a very large household, that can be discussed with Chemours regarding the amount of money loaded to the card. And the consent order does establish how quickly homes have to move from discovering a well is impacted to a final solution, whether it's filtration or a water line, so that that issue is remediated. Next slide, please. So we have a lot of online resources, an additional message this evening for you. It's a lot of information to take in if you're newer to the subject, but we have a lot as DEQ. Kennedy will talk to you after Jared about the DHHS information on the health side, but we have all of the consent order documents loaded to the website. We have a FAQ, frequently asked questions, a lot of information on filtration systems, and even documents that have been translated if you need another language other than English for these resources. Next slide, please. So our next steps, we really encourage people to get their wells sampled. That's the first next step, and a lot of continued work now underway in parts of Bladen, Cumberland, Sampson, Robeson, and definitely the newer counties, Harnett and Hoke, that were previously not in this equation. Please also share with us recommendations on making the well testing information available to your community. If you find out folks have not heard about this or not received a letter from Chemours, please let us know. And we will be looking at where municipal water lines are. If wells are packed in this expanded region, and Jared will show us the maps of that region, we'll be looking at what's the availability to connect to municipal water in addition to these filters. And we have a lot of ongoing additional environmental assessment work also related to Chemours. Next slide, please. And with that, I appreciate everyone's time this evening. I'm going to hand it back to Heather, and we'll be glad to take questions via the chat and answer them at the end. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing this information. So participants, please submit your questions through the chat, and now we will move to the next presentation that will be an explanation of the expanded sampling area presented by Jared Wilson.
Thank you. So thanks, Michael, for that great introduction. I'm going to step into the drinking water compliance plan a little bit more in depth and kind of give you the background of how things have been done in the past. So over the past 7 years, more than 10,000 private wells have been sampled around the facility, ranging from near the facility all the way out to more than 27 miles away. This was done in a stepwise approach. Initially, around the facility, there were 16 sectors that were drawn and split into 1 mile increments. As 10 exploratory samples were collected, that is residences that had their water sampled, if there was a detection that tripped the consent order, they would move out to the next mile. And so through that, they captured more than 10,000 private wells and moved 27.5 miles away from the facility. That said, we are still looking for the edge of contamination around the facility. Next slide, please. However, the current process has largely hit a wall, and step outs in the past 2 years have been relatively slow moving. This is due to the increasing size of sampling steps. As you're getting farther from the facility, those 1 mile increments are getting larger and larger, and variations in private well density. So to address that, we leveraged the existing sampling that has already occurred, and we developed 2 robust models to identify where the projected edge of contamination would be. Next slide, please. So model 1 leveraged existing sample data to model expected values in areas within the current sampling area, and extrapolated that information out 10% beyond the current areas. Next slide. While the second model utilized the existing exceedance rates within those sectors to identify at which point from the facility we would expect to see 0% of homes exceed the consent order threshold in each of the sectors. Next slide, please. With that, we developed a relatively conservative approach. Utilizing both models, we took the farthest of the 2 to estimate a projected delineation boundary. Within this projection, we're going to move the sampling program along at a faster pace, allowing for many more homes to become eligible in areas where contamination may be found. As with any model, this projection will need to be evaluated. After more data is collected to determine the efficiency of the model, we will look to adjust the distance in each of the sectors as needed. Next slide, please. Another expansion some of you may have heard about is the carryover from the lower four-county assessment area. Michael touched on that briefly, in which sampling was conducted in the counties around Wilmington, that is Columbus, Pender, Brunswick, and New Hanover, as part of a hypothesis testing step to determine the pathways of contamination in that area. One of the hypotheses that was supported is contamination through the floodplain downriver of the facility. Given that there is still a 55-mile stretch from the facility to the start of that sampling area, this floodplain throughout Bladen County was then added to the sampling area, and many of you may have already gotten letters for this. Next slide, please. So in culmination, the sampling area around the facility will more than double its current square mileage, increasing to a little more than 30 miles away from the facility, expanding into Hoke and Harnett counties, where it is expected that more than 9,000 homeowners reside with private wells as their primary drinking water source, and will thus become eligible for sampling. This is in addition to the 800 plus homes in the floodplain that were added. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Kennedy.
Thank you, Jared, for that presentation. And just as a reminder, please put your questions in the chat, and the next presentation will be on the health impacts related to PFAS presented by Kennedy Holt.
Kennedy, you may be muted.
Thank you. Sorry for that. So, hello everyone. I'm Kennedy Holt. I'm an environmental toxicologist with the Division of Public Health, and I'm going to go over briefly some health impacts that are related to PFAS compounds. Next slide, please. So, the reason I wanted to talk about these health impacts is just to help reaffirm the reasons for getting your well tested, as Michael just described earlier. And the reason we're concerned about these chemicals is, unfortunately, these chemicals, that includes Gen X and other PFAS compounds, have been associated with various health impacts, such as increased cholesterol levels, decreased vaccine response in children, increased liver toxicity, increased blood pressure, decrease in infant birth weight, and also various cancers such as kidney, testicular cancer. And so because of these health impacts, we really encourage people, if they receive a letter, to get their well tested, or as Michael said, if you have not received a letter, please call that number you got there, because we want people to have their wells tested, because then they can make informed decisions about their well water and proceed forward. And so next slide, please. And so one of the things I wanted to kind of point people towards is, one, it's hard without knowing your well water results, how exactly these PFAS compounds may impact you. However, at DHHS, we have developed several resources that are available to people that can help answer some of the questions that are associated with PFAS and how they impact yourself and your families, and then also how to help mitigate exposures as well. So next slide, please. So first off, I wanted to point out that we have what we call the clinician memo. And what this document is, and it's available on our website, as shown here at the bottom, is the location of it. What the purpose of this memo is to help, one, explain how PFAS can impact health, but also is a memo specifically for healthcare providers that helps point them to the science and the steps and the actions that they can potentially take and help use to talk to you or your family about PFAS impacts and what that may mean for your health. It also goes through different routine medical checkups that people can, healthcare providers can provide that target those or those organs, those systems that are impacted by PFAS. It also has information about how you can get yourself tested for PFAS as well. Next slide, please. We also have our gardening fact sheet, and this has been developed in response to concerns about backyard gardens using water from the potentially impacted wells. And so we have developed this gardening fact sheet in conjunction with colleagues at DEQ and with university partners at NC State and elsewhere to help provide information about different crops and suggested crops to grow in areas to help reduce the crops that take up less PFAS. It also has tips for how to mitigate exposures via gardening in terms of different soils and practices you can use to help mitigate PFAS exposure during gardening activities. Next slide, please. And then lastly, one thing I wanted to highlight is if you have other concerns about your well outside of PFAS, because again, these tests are so mainly focused on these PFAS chemicals such as Gen X. Just wanted to point out that we do have a private well program here at the state, and we have information about other routine well tests that you could have done, and information about other contaminants that could potentially be in your well as well. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I just wanted to provide our contact information here. This is both the general contact information for the branch that I work in, which is here at the top, the Occupational Environmental Epidemiology branch. And then below is my personal contact information with my work cell and office number and email, just in case you have additional questions about your health, or once you get your results from your well test, you're more welcome to call me and we can discuss things and go through more of this information in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Kennedy. That was a lot of helpful information. So now we'll transition to the question and answer panel. You've already met the panelists, Michael Scott, Jared Wilson, and Kennedy Holt. If anybody would like to ask a question, please go ahead and enter it now. As of right now, we don't have any questions that have been submitted. So I just wanted to maybe ask a question or two. Jared, you talked about the expanded area. Is it possible that this the current area could shrink?
So in the past, Chemours has honored sample offers once they've already been extended. If I don't believe that the area is going to shrink. If anything, it's going to increase, but more in a 1 to 2 miles at a time kind of fashion.
And then I was just wondering if anyone on the panel had any takeaway messages that you wanted to reiterate for the participants.
Hey, Heather, this is Michael. Once again, appreciate everybody attending. I think there may be one question that was just loaded to the chat we'll take a quick look at here, but definitely the first bullet, the first step is definitely requesting to get your private well sampled if that's your primary source of drinking water. What we mean by that is if you're connected to municipal water, you're paying a monthly water bill to a utility. Maybe you use a well to water your garden or water livestock. The well sampling is triggered when your private well is your primary drinking water source. But that's definitely the first step. Definitely encourage folks, to reach out and ask for that test. And as the slide shows here, and you mentioned, Heather, we do plan to have a follow-up in-person information session. We'll coordinate with several of the counties to find a good location for that, that people can come to it to also share information. I think the chat question, I think Catherine just
Yes.
loaded it. I'm trying to read it right quick.
So is there an interactive PFAS map that shows wells samples and results? Do we have So we'll start there. That's the first part of the question.
Yeah, I could take that. No, there is not currently an interactive PFAS map that shows the wells and results. We do collect the data and it is stored in our database and we do work with it. But there's not an interactive map at this time.
Thank you.
But to answer the second part of the question, do we have an established border of the PFAS contamination? We don't have a border of the final contamination, but we do have a projected delineation boundary in the 4-county area or in the area around the facility. And so if you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll get it provided.
The next part of the question is the Lumbee Tribal Territory is located in the southeastern North Carolina in Robeson, Hoke, Cumberland, and Scotland counties. Has DEQ reached out to the tribe for well testing?
Yeah, I'll start there. The geographical area, we have copies of all the properties that are included within that area. We'll take that question back to make sure we're clear on outreach to the Lumbee Tribal Territory. We often work through representatives of the Commission of Indian Affairs to reach out to the different tribes that may be impacted. And so we'll make sure we take that specific comment back and make sure that there's follow-up, directly with the Lumbee on that front. But thank you for the question.
And then we have another question. It says, how many PFAS are being tested for in the sampling area wells of the roughly 15,000 PFAS type that exist?
So the first answer is the consent order is called Attachment C. So definitely look up that document based on the links we provided. Attachment C has the 12 PFAS is the answer to part of the question that trigger alternate water. So Gen X is one of 12 compounds that can trigger a household receiving alternate water. The analytical suite, as we call it, includes other PFAS beyond just those 12. So it's kind of a two-part answer. Most of the analytical suites are going to include over 30 PFAS. So the question basically is there's thousands of PFAS. How many are tested for? It's a great question. The simple answer is it's going to be over 30 PFAS generally, but the decision to move a home to an alternate water source, that decision is based on the consent order, once again, the legal document, and it will make that decision point based on the 12 PFAS listed in that attachment C. So hopefully that helps, but a great question.
Great question. Next question is, why has the Fayetteville Works plant not been shut down given the scope of the contamination?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that question fairly often regarding continued operation at the plant. This would be specifically to Chemours. When we use the term Fayetteville Works, you're including several companies. Once again, Carrari, DuPont, also Chemours that operate on that 2,000-acre parcel on the Bladen-Cumberland line. Through the consent order, there were administrative penalties. There were consequences for the environmental impacts that were settled through that court-ordered document we call the consent order. So it laid the framework, yes, for the company to continue operation with requirements that specific controls had to be met to remove these PFAS from the environment. But it's a great question. We get it fairly often. If these impacts have occurred, why has the company been allowed to continue to operate? But basically through that mechanism, the requirements, the penalties, the legal requirements that were placed on the company through that court-ordered document is the basis of the answer.
Thank you, Michael. The next question is, do residents get results for the entire analytical suite?
Yeah, this is back to the analytical suite question. I'll try to get Jared to pitch in here too. The triggers, the 12, we are typically getting more than the 12 analytes. So, if a homeowner, wants the full analytical suite, we definitely can make sure we're trying to get that information for them. I think it's important to know, as the other question referenced, unfortunately, there are thousands of these PFAS in the environment, 1,000 4 digits, and the consent order is going to sample for a subset, meaning the analytical test should include more than 30 of these PFAS, but then you're taking that all the way down to only 12 that are in the legal document that will determine the alternate water. So as DEQ, we're looking at the full analytical suite. If there's another compound found, I'll give you an example. PFOS, this is a compound we find in a lot of North Carolina, unfortunately. It is not a compound that triggers alternate water under this testing based on the consent order document. So yes, there'll be other analytes. Yes, that information should be, conveyed to the private well owner. And what we're doing as DEQ, when we find these other PFAS, once again, a good example is PFOS, we will also notify the homeowner. Look, you were not eligible under the consent order for alternate water. Here's how that requirement's written, but we're seeing levels of some other compounds that we should also address. And so that's an example of follow-up that we have done.
And then we've one more question that I see here. So if you do have a question, go ahead and ask it. This one is the information shared on social media to reach a wider audience?
Yeah, we definitely can talk about that. We've got a good group of our communications staff online with us this evening. So thank you for offering that suggestion. We do put out different postings on Facebook at times for different department DEQ initiatives. Early on, there have been some Facebook, even Facebook Live interviews associated with Chemours. We have not done that platform, meaning Facebook or Facebook Live, in a while, but appreciate that suggestion, and we'll definitely talk to our communications group about that.
Okay, I don't see any other questions that have come in. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up if that works. So now we're going to wrap up this session, and as a reminder, residents within the expanded area where your well water is your primary source of drinking water and you would like to have your well tested, please call Chemours 910-678-1101. If you have additional questions that were not answered during the session, please send those to publicaffairs@deq.nc.gov. We are also looking to have another information session. We anticipate that it will be in person, and we will share this information as it becomes available. For more information, a recording of this information session, and a response to the questions, please visit the website shown on the screen and scroll down almost to the bottom of the page and select Community Updates tab. You can also use the QR code here for convenience. And this concludes tonight's information session. We appreciate your time, your attention, and your thoughtful questions. Thank you.